Hi guys, I'm James McIntosh, and today we've got a really cool episode. Well, you may know already from this title, we're going to be starting a new podcast. This podcast is going to be speaking to some of your favourite journalists, content creators, presenters, and what better club and place to start with than Portsmouth? I'm joined with a fantastic commentator. Like some of the work he does for BBC, you've probably seen already. He does Match of the Day, Final Score. We'll hear a lot more about it in this interview, as today I'm joined with none other than Chris Wise. Chris, first of all, how are you, mate?
Nice to see you.
I mean, other than the early start, looking forward to this.
Yeah, very much so. I think it's always nice to share our thoughts on the industry and sort of how we got going, and also and obviously to talk about football. I mean, who doesn't love to sit here and talk about football?
It's like literally the dream job, really, isn't it? Just getting paid to watch football, talk about it. I mean, a lot of listeners watching at home, I'm sure they're probably dreaming of a career like this. It's similar with me. So we'll be looking at how you got into the industry, also looking a lot at Pompey. First of all, though, could you just speak to the viewers about how you got into football in the first place and how you really started getting into commentary?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always loved football and I've loved English language. So the two things combined sort of naturally led me towards wanting to be a football broadcaster. Obviously, wanting to be a football commentator and getting there are two very different things. So I've been very fortunate along the way that I've had opportunities that have led me to get to the point where I am now. So I started with the Portsmouth News, and I was doing some local work covering Portsmouth, but just sort of collecting fan interviews from games, collating them, and then sending them off to the newspaper on the Saturday night. I was doing that while I was at college, and then from college I went to university. I had a degree in sports journalism, but on the side I began my pathway into radio. So I was doing some local reporting on Southampton, as it was then, in the Championship with Power FM, who are now sort of part of the Capital Group. And that really kind of set me up to kick on to the next level, because that was where I began really building my contacts and understanding how radio worked and what was needed from me to get to the next stage. So I went from there, did a year basically with my final year of university, combined with a year of working in radio at the weekends. And then I got my first chance. And my first chance was with Key Radio, which was a radio station in Portsmouth, which some people may remember, but we're going back a few years now. And that they had the commentary rights to Portsmouth games. So I went in, I worked under Sam Matterface, who's someone that you all know, and I'm sure people will be aware of, the ITV commentator. I had a year working with Sam. Sam moved on, I got his job, and from there I landed on my feet because Portsmouth reached an FA Cup final, they got into Europe. So I had all these amazing experiences at a very, very young age. And then after about 4 or 5 years at Key Radio, I went to the BBC. That was the first time I worked for the BBC. I went to BBC Wiltshire, covered Swindon Town as their commentator. Again, had an amazing time covering Swindon with Paolo Di Canio, who was in charge at the time. So it was a frantic period. And then I was lucky enough to begin to get my opportunities in network radio and network television. So that's how my door opened, I guess, to start working for Match of the Day and for Final Score and for 5 Live and a few others.
Well, safe to say you haven't done too bad with that journey whatsoever. You mentioned there about how you worked with the Keys, so covering a lot of Pompey games. So clearly, Pompey, it's always been a club very close to your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I grew up as a Portsmouth fan. Like my dad was a Pompey fan, and so it was always in me to become a Blue. Yeah. When I'm broadcasting, I don't necessarily talk about being a Portsmouth fan on air, just from an impartiality perspective, I guess. But I mean, I can talk to you about the fact that I'm a big Pompey fan. I always have been, and I used to go and watch games as a kid every Saturday with my dad. We'd go home away. I was a mascot a couple of games when I was younger as well. So the love has always been there, and I mean, I consider myself so fortunate that I now am in a position where I can talk about the football club in a professional aspect. The downside to all of this, of course, is that I don't actually get to see them as much as, certainly as much as I used to, and definitely as much as I'd like to, because my work takes me elsewhere a lot of times on a weekend or during the week. But whenever I get the chance, I'll always go down and watch them, and I still get that magical feeling at Fratton Park now that I had when I sort of first went to a game when I was 5 or 6 years old.
Well, that actually leads me nicely on to my next question. So you mentioned you can sometimes struggle because, like I said, you do work with Match of the Day, Final Score, so working with a lot of the big boys. But when you do come back to Fratton Park, you mentioned it feels special. Do you try and always try and keep up to date when watching your big games? So try and have a little Twitter box with Pompey in it, try and do something to keep up to date with.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's. I guess with Match of the Day, it's slightly more tricky because without going into the intricacies of how Match of the Day works, when you're commentating for Match of the Day, you are very much on your own. You haven't got anything in your ear as such from other, for example, if I was working for 5 Live or for Final Score, I can hear what's going on in the studio and going around to the other games. Whereas with Match of the Day, you don't have any of that. So you literally get to half time, and that would be my first chance to kind of check on what's happening elsewhere, and the same with full time. So it's quite a unique. It's actually quite a unique experience doing that, because I think that if you're a big football fan, on a Saturday afternoon, you are constantly sort of checking the football scores, aren't you? To check whoever you support, you want to know how they're getting on. So throw yourself into a position where you're commentating, and you're completely unaware of what's happening anywhere else around the country until you get to half time and you're chance to check it. Yeah, it's quite an odd experience, really. So whenever I get the chance, I'll always kind of follow what I can, but sometimes it's not possible.
I would have loved to see your face with a lot of the half-time, full-time scores. From the games you weren't watching, probably the Saturday 3 o'clock games, I mean, safe to say, there's been some very, very interesting results, because it's been such a turbulent start for Pompey's season. We're at the international break stage at the moment. Looking back at the start of the season, how do you reflect on it so far?
From Portsmouth's perspective, I think it's been quite interesting, because last season the fundamental of their campaign was their home form was excellent in the second half of the season, and they struggled away from home. And it's been very odd to see that trend almost has altered. Maybe not so much in the last couple of weeks, but certainly in those first few weeks of the season, Portsmouth's performances and their results were primarily coming away from home rather than at Fratton Park, which was quite an interesting dynamic. I think where Pompey are at right now, moving into this October international break, is that they will reflect on this first chunk of games and say, we're probably about where we should be. The win over Middlesbrough last weekend, moving into the international break, was massive for Pompey, because having drawn that home game with Watford a few days before, I think there was a lot of emphasis, at least to get a performance from Portsmouth in that game. The fact that they beat them, and obviously Middlesbrough were unbeaten, they were top of the league, it felt like an enormous result for them. And I think it shows in the same way they did it last season a couple of times. The match against Leeds United at Fratton Park sticks in the memory. It shows that when that team are absolutely on their game, they are a match for anybody in that league. And you've got to bear in mind as well that Pompey are missing some key players at the moment. There's no Nico Schmidt, the goalkeeper. Colin Shaughnessy, who's one of their key centre-halves. Obviously, Josh Murphy's not been available for the last few matches as well. So they are doing this without important personnel. So I think when you factor that in as well, you would say that this actually has been a decent start for Pompey in what at times has been slightly difficult circumstances.
Let's talk about that Middlesbrough win, because for a lot of that game, really, considering it was first versus more mid-table side in Pompey, I thought Pompey more or less convincingly won that game. It looked like it was really only going to be Pompey coming out with the 3 points in that game. So coming off of that, obviously building a lot of momentum, do you think in some ways international breaks come for the wrong time for John Mousinho?
I feel that he will actually probably say, do you know what, this time around we could do with sort of 2 weeks without a game.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that, I think, is because it gives them 2 weeks to work on the fitness of Murphy and to make sure that he's absolutely right, that when they bounce into that next game at Leicester City, when they come back from the international break, that hopefully they'll have a fit and firing Murphy again. I think also it gives them a chance to take stock of the situation and where they're at right now. So I actually feel that this particular international break probably doesn't come at the worst time for Pompey.
Well, we'll look a little bit about the teams who play after international break, getting your views on it. Let's just say there are some very, very interesting clashes, which I'm sure you'll probably be doing a little bit of coverage on, looking forward to it. So we'll speak about that a little bit later. But before we do that, let's actually talk a little bit about last season. Obviously, Pompey did, I think, actually extremely well to stay up. For a long patch of the season, it looked like they could have been in that relegation battle. But towards that end patch, really started pulling away from it. So do you think the ambitions going into this season was to really just cement Pompey as that championship side now?
I think so. I think you're right. I think last season was always going to be a really difficult transition season for Portsmouth, because it's the first time in nigh on a decade that they've been out of that tier, the second tier of English football. And I think for Portsmouth, the primary reason for the whole being of the season was, can we stay in the league? Can we make sure that we survive? Not necessarily thrive, but just survive, just be there. Because it took them so long to get back to being a championship team again. And like you say, the first 2 or 3 months of the season were really tough, and it was a tricky baptism of fire for that squad. But once Colby Bishop was available to play again, he really helped them turn the corner, because suddenly they had a focal point in their forward line. Fratton Park became the fortress that we all know it can be, and that helped them to kick on. So last season, lowest wage budget in the whole division. You've got to bear in mind that that's a massive factor at play. And the more that we move on, the more that financial input into football clubs is becoming more significant, and the difference between the Premier League and the EFL is becoming more stark by the season. So for Portsmouth to compete and not be in that bottom three was a tremendous achievement. And not just that, but the fact that they ended up staying up with games to spare as well. I thought John Messina did an amazing job last season. So this season, how do they build on that? What does success look like for Portsmouth? Well, success probably looks like, can we ensure that we're not in that relegation sort of mix with the nerves racing through the system like they would have been for much of last season. I don't think there's any anticipation that Portsmouth are going to suddenly become a team that are pushing for the playoffs, because they're not there yet, and the budget doesn't allow them to be there yet. But they are moving, I would say, in the right direction. The squad as a whole looks stronger than it did 12 months ago. They've obviously put more investment into the squad as well. So everything is pointed in the right way. And as we saw with the Middlesbrough game at the weekend, it shows that they can mix it with the very best teams in the league. And I think they're in for a good season in what looks like a wide open championship this season.
Well, juxtaposing then this season to last season, so obviously you would have seen a lot of Pompey last season. What do you think they really needed to take away from last season and improve going into this season? And secondly, do you think they've done it?
What did they need to improve? Well, I guess they had a couple of loan players in last season in midfield in particular, and one of them, Freddie Potts, was outstanding.
Exceptional.
Yeah. He had a really, really good season with Pompey, and I mean, highlighted by the fact that he's now part of West Ham's squad for Premier League games. So how do you fill that void in midfield? Well, the way they went about it was to go and spend in excess of £1 million on two players, but two players that have come from outside of of the EFL or the Premier League, so that they went to Sweden and signed Luke LaRue, and to get Mark Kosnowski as well from Hungary, from Budapest. So now to follow on from that question, have they improved? I would say right now no, because you're kind of back in a position where the players that are occupying those midfield positions are largely players that were there last season, with the exception of John Swift. But that isn't to say that we aren't going to see Kosnowski and LaRue become more permanent members of that starting 11. I think people still underestimate the difficulties of moving to a new country and adjusting to a different style of football. So I really hope that those two players in particular can pay back the investment that Portsmouth have put into them. But I think people just need to understand that patience is required. But they're going in the right direction, and the fact that they are willing to spend that sort of money now as a championship team on players shows that there is a level of commitment from the owners, I think, to stay in this league.
Well, you've actually sort of foreshadowed a lot of your next answer probably in my next question. So I was going to ask, obviously this summer transfer window, it felt like such a big one for Pompey in terms of the players they had brought in. Connor Chaplin, a marquee signing on deadline day. We'll speak about him in the next bit. Segasic, I think, has done quite well. Overall though, like you mentioned, there has been a few players yet to really live up to their expectations involved in the signings. Would you class that as a success, the transfer window?
I think when the transfer window shut, you would look at Pompey's business and say, yeah, that's a strong transfer window. I mean, helped massively by the signing of Connor Chaplin. I know we'll talk about him in a minute, but he really helped to elevate the level of which people viewed how that transfer window went for Pompey. But a few weeks on from that, are we yet seeing the fruits of the recruitment from the summer? The answer, the true answer is probably not. That isn't to say that we aren't going to get there, but have those who have come in delivered the sort of performances that you would want your new signings to deliver? Probably not really. I think they'd say they would like a little bit more from John Swift. They'd probably fair to say they'd like a little bit more from Connor Chaplin in terms of the first few games of the season. We spoke about Kosnowski and LaRue. Obviously, we haven't really seen Mackenzie Kirk yet. Uma, who came in from Crystal Palace, the winger's been injured since he arrived, so we haven't had a good look at him. I guess Josh Knight's another one who's come in and is now. Has now got his opportunity in the team because of the injury to Connor Shaughnessy, and he's looked solid alongside Regan Paul, so that augurs quite well for the future for Pompey. But I think the foundation of what they've brought in is strong, but it is going to take time, I think, to get them to where Pompey want them and expect them to be.
Well, I know, like you mentioned there, one of the real big boy signings was that Connor Chaplin one. I'm not sure if you had any intel, any preview about that before he actually got announced. If you did, when did you find out about it? And you must have been stoked that he was signing on deadline day.
Yeah, it was an absolutely extraordinary signing, wasn't it?
Really
because
was.
It caught. I just think it caught so many people unaware. I think considering he played for Ipswich on the Saturday. Obviously he'd been in the Premier League with them the season before, was immense in the season they went up from the Championship into the Premier League. So it feels like a massive get for Pompey. And obviously, all centred around the fact that it's the local lad is coming home.
The former fan favourite.
Exactly, which is it's a brilliant story. We began to get wind of it around lunchtime on transfer deadline day.
So it's still quite late though.
Yeah. I think to be honest, it all moved relatively quickly. I think he'd had conversations over the weekend with Kieran McKenna off the back of playing in that game on the Saturday for Ipswich. I think it was against Derby from memory.
I'm pretty sure it was Derby.
Yeah, and I think the conversation revolved around Kieran McKenna saying, look, I don't know how much regular football you're going to get here. And Connor at that stage knew, I think, that there was some interest from Pompey. I don't think there are many clubs that he would have departed Ipswich for at that particular juncture.
Definitely.
Many, if any, but the lure of coming back to Pompey was strong. What I would say the club have done really well is because they had to stretch their budget to get Connor Chaplin on the back end of the week previous. I don't think Connor Chaplin was a realistic target for them, certainly in terms of the budget that they had. So they had to go to the ownership and say, can we have a little bit more money to get this one over the line, because it's a significant one. And obviously the owners responded positively, which again is another good sign that that everyone is in harmony. And then it all just sort of moved very, very quickly. But of course it would move quickly because you've got a player who's very keen to get the deal done, and a club who are very keen to get him. So an astonishing piece of business. And I spoke to a couple of people outside of the Pompey bubble, because it's very easy, obviously, to sort of be slightly biased when you're talking within the Pompey circle. But a couple of people said to me, I think it's one of the best bits of business in the Championship, sort of full stop in the whole of the summer window. So very good signing for him.
I bet your Pompey group chats were all absolutely exploding.
Yeah, they really were. I mean, it really was what you don't have now is you very rarely have a story like that of a player coming to a football club that has had there's been no build up to it, there's been no murmurings or rumours, and there were absolutely none with Chaplin coming back to Pompey. I don't remember a player coming into Pompey with the sort of unexpected fanfare that came with Connor Chaplin, probably since Jermaine Defoe arrived. So we're going back many years. So there's just the transfer deadline day these days. There's so many journalists, and there's so many agents talking that nothing is a secret.
No.
And there's always some smoke coming from somewhere. But with Chaplin there was none, and that's the beauty of it. It felt like an old school signing, I guess, because back in the day where actually clubs could sign players from nowhere and no one knew about it, and then bang, here they are and they're with us now. And Chaplin almost that was almost how the Chaplin deal worked out.
The days before Fabrizio, what a time it would have been.
What a time it was.
But also this deal, do you think it's indicative of just how well John Mousinho's been part of the whole club now, in the sense of bringing in these key marquee players that he wants, and thanks to what he's done with Pompey, really exploiting that young talent, turning them into future world beaters, hopefully, with the likes of Freddie Potts. Do you think he really does have that pulling power now?
I think what's really interesting, we sat down actually on the we do a podcast, as you know, Who Needs Mourinho, for the BBC, and we sat down last season with John Mousinho, and one of the things we spoke about was his presentations that he does to the players before they sign. Now this isn't a hugely uncommon thing in football, but the devil is always in the detail, and I think Freddie Potts, to use him as an example, was really impressed with what John Mousinho and his coaching staff presented to him when they sat down, because it was very, very specific and very tailored to what they wanted from him and what they thought he could bring to the side. And I think that ultimately swung the deal his way. I mean, John Mousinho is a really impressive guy. As you know, I mean, he talks brilliantly,
incredibly well.
And I do feel like he is destined for even greater things in the game that may well be beyond Portsmouth. So I think the club recognise they're very fortunate to have such a astute manager right now. I think with the Chaplin deal, was John Mousinho a factor? Yeah, probably, because the way that John Mousinho's teams play lend very well to the sort of player that Connor Chaplin is. Had there been another coach there, would Connor Chaplin have come in? Probably, because it's more about the
club,
story of coming back to Portsmouth for Conor Chaplin. But certainly in the case of pretty much every other player that comes that isn't a former Portsmouth player, I'd say John Messina is a massive pull for them.
Yeah, definitely. We'll speak a little bit more about John a little later. But staying on the note of Conor Chaplin, and I'm actually going to throw Bishop into this debate as well. It just feels like we had such high expectations of them going into this season that they were going to be working well as a duo, perhaps, working well with one another, scoring hopefully bags of goals. But yet to really come into fruition, and I think a lot of fans have been disappointed with that. Also, speaking about another player, Segasic, who signed for the club, it's given him the time to shine, but so far, out of all the forward players, he's been the real one to, well, the only one really to shine this season in that attacking line.
Yeah, I think I think they probably got more out of Segasic already than they thought they would. Like, he really hit the ground running. Obviously scored the opening weekend against Oxford United, and and has looked a Championship player already. I think they'll be a little wary with Segasic not to over expose him or to expect too much of him, because he is obviously still young, and this is a big step up for him in terms of where he was in the A-League out in Australia. I guess you have to throw Murphy's name in terms of those who have performed well in that forward line this season for Pompey, because even though he's been missing for the past few games, his ability to change a game with a brilliant ball from a wide area for Bishop is he's amongst the very best for doing that, I think, in the league. But going back to your original point about Bishop and Chaplin, has that relationship come together yet? No, probably not. I think from Bishop's perspective, and I'll always say this about Colby Bishop, I think when you're a striker leading the line, there is an expectation always that you're going to be the player that scores the goals. But I think sometimes with Bishop, what goes underappreciated is the work that he is putting in off the ball, his running off the ball, the way that he can ruffle up defenders. I mean, he's an absolute nightmare to play against for a centre half, isn't he? Because his willingness to battle is there from minute 1 to minute 90. I personally feel he's an excellent striker, and I think he leads the line brilliantly for Pompey. And it isn't just about goals for him; it's about how he can open up spaces for other players. Chaplin, probably. I mean, I'm sure he would say this himself. Conor Chaplin, the performances from him so far probably haven't been where he'd have wanted them to be in the first few games. I think in his debut against Southampton in the South Coast Derby, for 65-70 minutes, I thought he was very good and impactful. And you thought, he's a razor sharp player, and this is exactly the player that Portsmouth thought they were getting. And then what followed from there, obviously the disappointing home defeat to Sheffield Wednesday, where Chaplin struggled, but with the caveat that all of them struggled on the pitch that day. And he hasn't quite been able to find his rhythm yet. He was a little bit unlucky not to score against Middlesbrough at the weekend with that cut back to him and the shot which took a deflection to take it away. I fully think it will come together for Conor Chaplin, and it's difficult as well to understand the pressure that he's probably feeling of being back here, knowing that now he's a Premier League player and carrying a lot of weight of expectation on the shoulders. You probably have to play that in. I feel like as soon as he scores his first goal for the club, you'll see that we'll see the Conor Chaplin we know is there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, hopefully, like you said, once he starts getting that goal, it'll be a little bit of a goal machine, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Another person who is absolutely phenomenal for Pompey, music to your ears as well, Josh Murphy, recently signed a new contract. How pivotal is it keeping him, especially with all the interest from other teams? Leicester looked very promising, like wanting them to sign him.
Yeah.
But Pompey kept hold of him.
Yeah.
Such a big deal. Almost feels like a new signing.
Yeah, it does. In a way, it does, because I think there was a genuine fear that they'd lose him in the transfer window. That Leicester interest was very strong, and we know that they've made Portsmouth an offer. But what I liked about Portsmouth's stance and John Messina's stance in terms of it, he's getting the message from the hierarchy that we're not going to sell, and that was outwardly there for people to hear. Look, we don't need to sell Josh Murphy in this transfer window. What Leicester offered for Murphy was way short of even sort of tempting Portsmouth to say yes. What it did as well, I think, for the player himself, who no doubt would have had his head turned slightly by that, because the financial incentives of joining Leicester City would have been far greater than what the contract he would have been on at Portsmouth. But obviously what it does for him is to say, okay, well look, I'm a wanted man, so let's talk about a new deal. So his agent has clearly struck at the right time. He's made sure that he's tied his player down to a nice bumper new deal, but fully justified, because over the last 12 months he's been Pompey's standout player, and he's a very, very difficult player to fill the void of when he's not there. It's almost impossible to have somebody within that squad to step up and deliver what he can deliver.
Well, I'm sure we'll see a lot more of him when he is back from that injury, hopefully after international breaks. So yeah, we'll see a lot more of him. But talking a lot more about a lot of the games we have played in that first patch of the season, the one for me that really should have stand out but didn't really in the end was that South Coast derby. There was so much build up to it. The first league game between the two clubs in 13 years. The TV companies were really pushing it, saying, yeah, this is going to be the best championship game this season.
Yeah.
It just felt like it really under-delivered. I'm pretty sure, was it the first goalless draw between the two in decades?
100 years.
100 years, yeah. So
yeah.
really just shows what perhaps a disappointing game it was.
Yeah, and I think if you're not a Portsmouth fan, and I all week had been saying to people who are not Pompey fans that you've got to watch this game like it's a South Coast derby. You don't understand how intense it's going to be and how good a spectacle it's going to be. And then at the end, sort of had my tail slightly between my legs, and I'm getting messages saying that wasn't very good, and I'm like saying, yeah, I know it wasn't great, was it? And it wasn't. Like it wasn't a brilliant South Coast derby, and I think it was a much better day for Portsmouth than it was for Southampton, who I was actually quite surprised how poor Southampton were in that game, particularly in the first half. But I give some credit to Portsmouth for that, because they made it very, very difficult for Southampton. What I found really interesting was the atmosphere inside St Mary's that day, because in the minutes before kickoff, I was inside the ground. It was feverish, and you felt like, yeah, this is what it's all about. And there aren't too many occasions where the noise that was created can sound like that at a game. But within about the first 10 or 15 minutes, because Southampton was so bad, that really the only noise was coming from the away end. Yeah. But it led to this kind of slightly strange atmosphere within the stadium, because you had large portions of it where it was more frustration rather than passion. So yeah, look, the game itself was poor, wasn't it? I think there was there only one shot on target from each
I'm pretty
team,
sure.
right?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can tell you what shots though.
No, they were insignificant. Look, Pompey had the better chances. Probably should have won the game, really. But a great point for Pompey that day, and yeah, I'll say it again at risk of sounding like an idiot for a second time this season, but that game at Fratton Park is going to be great, and certainly there'll be no issue about the atmosphere that day.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because from that first game, I think I can take away two takeaways. One being that Southampton fan, I think he's called Pete Dawson. Perhaps, yeah, I think he might need to work on his dancing a little bit more. And the handshake between John Messina and Will Still. You just feel like when they return back to Fratton Park, there's going to be a certain little bit of an individual rivalry between the two. Yeah. Do you think that will build anything going into the game?
I don't think so. I think John Messina was quite clever about what he was, what he was doing. I mean, he clearly knew that the cameras would have been on the two of them, and obviously there was a heated conversation that happened at the very start of the game, and that sort of set the tone for the whole afternoon, really. I love John Messina's comment afterwards in his post-match press conference. You saw this where he basically said, look, Portsmouth and Southampton managers should never be friends. Like, Will Still didn't invite me in. for a drink, but look, we're not mates, and all the time we're managers of these two football clubs. We'll never be friends, which I thought was fantastic. So there'll be a little edge, I imagine, in the technical areas when the two teams are back at Fratton Park. But I don't think it'll be the story, and I genuinely do think it will be far more fierce, that game at Fratton Park, than that recent one at St Mary's.
What do you think the story will be then for that South Coast derby?
It's difficult to say, isn't it? Because we're obviously still a couple of months away from the game, and you don't know how the two teams' seasons are going to go between now and then. I mean, if the game were being played next weekend, you'd be saying, well, Southampton's season at the moment is continuing to stutter.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a side who've just come down from the Premier League, who financially are in a different world really to Portsmouth in terms of what they're capable of right now. They'll be feeling the pressure as they were at St Mary's a few weeks ago, because the expectation for them is at the very least is to be in the top six.
Yeah.
Whereas that's not the same pressure for Portsmouth. There isn't the anticipation that they're going to be pushing for the playoffs. So I feel, talking now at this stage, that it feels to me like that game could well feel like a real pressure cooker situation for Southampton. But who knows? Who knows? Like we might be sat here in a couple of months and Portsmouth might be on the periphery of getting into the top six, and we're saying this is a mighty good game for Pompey.
Yeah. Well, who knows? Like I said, we'll have to do one at the end of the season, see how Pompey do. Fingers crossed a miracle happens. How cool would that be? But also, before we even get to that stage, get to the playoffs, I think, like we said already a few times, it's been very stop-start for Portsmouth. It feels weird saying that one week they lose to Sheffield Wednesday, I think 2-0 was that at home, and then literally the following week they go to top of the table, Middlesbrough at home, they pull off a great result. It just feels like there's a certain bit of inconsistency about Portsmouth. You've been watching football for some time now. What do you think this inconsistency is boiling down to in this Pompey side?
Yeah, I think injuries have played a part in this. We've touched on this already, but the losses of Schmidt and Shaughnessy and Murphy can't help but disrupt you as a team. The Sheffield Wednesday performance feels like a bit of an anomaly to me in Pompey's season. Really interesting to hear what John Messina was saying after that game, where he essentially said that he felt that they underestimated Sheffield Wednesday, because obviously there's a lot going on with that football club at the moment off the pitch, which is affecting matters on the pitch. That game, he Messina called, I think said it was the worst performance under him so far, and I think they'll really feel like that was an opportunity missed, because had they won that game, they would be right there in terms of like knocking on the door of the top six. But on the flip side, they've turned in some very good performances, Portsmouth. I mean, the Middlesbrough one was gritty. The point at West Bromwich Albion, who, let's not forget, at that stage of the season, albeit very early on in the campaign, they were unbeaten as well, and Pompey went to the Hawthorns and got a very creditable point. So it has been a bit of a mixed bag, but it sort of sums up A, where Portsmouth are right now, and also B, the championship table as a whole, which feels like a wide open league this season, where you may well end up with a team like Portsmouth, not necessarily Portsmouth, who get into the top six, who maybe you wouldn't normally expect to be there. Do
you think that is the aim for Pompey, to try and perhaps not get in the top six, but at least maybe challenge for it this season?
I don't think that it's. I don't think if it was an aim, I don't necessarily think it's a realistic one. Only because you're still talking about a team who've got pretty much the lowest budget in the league, so they'd be punching way above their weight if they were to get into the top six, or frankly be even close to that top six this season. Of course, with any club, if they get some momentum going and they have it feels to me like they have the right set of players now to kick on and to be better than they were last season, then yes, there's an outside chance they could be there or thereabouts. Do I think they'll be there? Probably not, because we've already seen this season that, for the good performances that Pompey can deliver, there are inconsistent ones as well, and more disappointing offerings. So I think you're probably looking at a team who will finish somewhere in mid-table this season. If you're to ask me now in October where I think Pompey might finish, I'd say somewhere between perhaps 12th and 16th feels about
reasonable,
right.
Yeah.
But that is progress, and that is, that's another step forward from last season, and all the time that they are taking positive strides in the right direction, then you can only say that this is a team on the up.
Definitely. Well, we've looked at Pompey. This is where the people at home watching, you can get involved. I'm going to ask Chris some pretty juicy questions here just to finish off this episode.
Okay.
You might have to think about it. You might have to do some outlandish predictions in this. But I've just got a few predictions lined up here. Like I said, if you're at home watching this, leave your predictions in the comments. Starting off with the Championship, how do you see that going? Who do you think is going to go up to the Prem this season?
Oh, that is
I told you quite. I really am.
Yeah.
Oh, also, rule: you can't give any political answers, so you can't stand on the fence with any.
Okay. Well, I will say, even though they're not in the top 6 right now, I feel like Ipswich will go up.
Do you think so?
Yeah,
What makes you say that?
Because I think their squad is so rich with depth. And when you move into the winter months of the season and those Tuesday, Saturdays becoming more and more relentless, and injuries become more prevalent, you need the ability to change things up and to replace like for like.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
What Ipswich have is an amazing squad now, and even though they will say that a few of their players aren't necessarily firing yet, for me, if they can pull it together, they should really be in those top 2 positions. So I'd say Ipswich. I mean, obviously it'd be easy to look at Coventry now because they are top of the table.
They're a juggernaut at the moment.
They are, and scoring goals for fun
Literally.
right now. And Frank Lampard's doing an amazing job at Coventry. He's doing an incredible job. So for the story, I'd quite like to see them have a crack at sort of getting back into the Premier League as well. But yeah, if I'm going to stick my neck out and I guess
I like the way this is
stick my neck
going.
out, I'm going to say Ipswich. I'm going to say Ipswich in the top 2.
Oh, so guarantee then they're going to be your 2 automatics.
You want me to name 2? You want me to name both?
Yeah, I want you to name both of them.
Okay, well I'll say Ipswich and Coventry then.
Oh, yeah, okay, perfect. This one, I think this is going to be an interesting one. Obviously, you did work for Match of the Day, final score. Who's going to win the Premier League this season?
What would you like me to say?
I would like you to say Arsenal.
I thought you might.
Are you going to say Arsenal though?
The one thing I would say about Arsenal is that having saw that their game against West Ham United recently, when I've been to the Emirates recently, in terms of recent season, I've always felt like there's been this like nervous energy that ripples around the Emirates Stadium, and sometimes it transfers onto the pitch as well in terms of the Arsenal performances. And they have had this unwanted ability to muck things up, Arsenal.
Oh, the Bottlers, our nickname.
Yeah, well, and that's you saying that, not me. But I feel like I felt like that I did get any semblance of that from the West Ham game. I felt like they were so composed, and clearly this is a team now under Mikel Arteta that have the capabilities of dealing with the setbacks of injuries, and they've got another one now with Martin Ødegaard, and previously that would have really hurt them, but now it feels like they've got the players within the squad to cover the absence of someone like Ødegaard. So if I was to say now who I think might win it, I genuinely think it could be Arsenal. I do think it could be their season. I mean, Liverpool suddenly look like they're having the transition season that everyone thought was going to happen 12 months ago when Arne Slot came in, but 12 months ago they hadn't signed anyone, whereas this season they've obviously recruited quite heavily. So how does that all blend together? Manchester City aren't the force that they were 2 seasons ago. I struggle to see them having the consistency that's going to be needed for them to win the league. So right now, it feels like Arsenal is the pick.
That is a perfect answer for that question. You can also say Arsenal again for the next question, because I'm going to ask you who's going to be lifting the Champions League.
Yeah, Are Arsenal capable of winning both in one season? I mean, that would be
a real unreal
remarkable
season,
yeah. Wouldn't it? So I'm gonna say no to that. I mean, we saw Paris Saint-Germain win it last season clearly, and that win at Barcelona in the league phase recently, I think proved that this is a team under Luis Enrique who are very capable of doing it again. And I don't see too many teams who have the immense quality that they have, like Paris Saint-Germain, who are devastating in so many different areas of the pitch. So I would probably pick PSG to go and do it again.
Very interesting, very interesting. Well, we'll see it all unfold. You can probably actually watch a lot of it on BBC, so giving you guys a free plug there.
Thank you.
We'll see how Chris does, and we'll get you back on when Arsenal have done the league and Pompey get the playoffs, I think. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Follow Chris. I'll put all his social media handles in the link below, and we will see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.